I don't regret anything that happens when I go with my natural grain and go with my gut. When I ignore it or dismiss it for who I think is a bigger, better person, that's when I start to have potential regrets, is when I start to do things the way other people do them because I see them having success.
Welcome, visionaries, creators, innovators, entrepreneurs, leaders, and growth seekers of all types to the Passion Struck podcast. Hi, I'm John Miles, a peak performance coach, multi-industry CEO, Navy veteran, and entrepreneur on a mission to make passion go viral for millions worldwide. And each week I do so by sharing with you an inspirational message and interviewing high achievers from all walks of life to unlock their secrets and lessons to becoming passion struck. The purpose of our show is to serve you, the listener, by giving you tips, tasks, and activities you can use to achieve peak performance and pursue the passion-driven life you have always wanted to have. Now, let's become passion struck. Welcome to the Passion Struck podcast, and thank you so much for joining us today. I know how important your time is, and the fact that there are over 2.6 million different podcasts out there that you could be listening to. So it means so much to us that you're here today spending your time with us. And if there is a specific topic that you want to hear about or a guest that you want to hear on this show, please DM me on Instagram at John R. Miles or Passion Struck Podcast. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please go and subscribe to our YouTube channel at John R. Miles. We have a great episode today with Gail Swift, and I'm going to start, as I always do, with a couple of quotes. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And Kathy Kolbe said, "I dare you to dare me." And that's pretty much the way my life has been. You tell me I can't, I will. Two great quotes that form a great foundation for today's episode with Gail Swift. Now let me tell you a little bit more about Gail. Gail is a speaker, Kolbe Consultant, and certified life coach who is fiercely committed to guiding students and families to take action in their natural abilities. And today we discuss why she left her six-figure career in pursuit of the Holy Grail, why it is so vital that people have the freedom to work their way because they will have more effort and mental capability to contribute to their work, why lives are continuing to change as people uncover their superpowers, and doing so by asking the right questions. How you will never know the day or time that an empowering question will reveal personal transformation. How she got into using the Kolbe Index, what it is, and how you can apply it to your life and that of your child, how she uses it to coach kids and families, and so much more. Now, let's become passion struck. Gail Swift, I am so excited to welcome you to the Passion Struck podcast. Thank you for coming on today.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you for having me, John.
Well, I had the chance to listen to a number of podcasts that you've done recently before the show and did some research on you along the way. And I thought a great place for us to start this show so the audience could really get a deep understanding of you is the transition you made into what you're doing now. Because as I was reading about you, you were living what many people would aspire to live, a six-figure job where, you know, a lot of people think that that is their aspiration. And for you, you were living it and you decided to give it up in a very visible way. So I was hoping you could kind of talk to the audience about, you know, how did you get into that position? And then what made you take that leap to do what you're doing now?
How did I get into the position of doing what I was doing or the leaving part?
Well, doing what you were doing, and then
Right.
why did you decide to leave?
I wound up doing what I was doing because in college, first of all, I realized for the first time that I was really good at theater. I was really good at producing shows. And when I started organizing and producing and directing shows, I would ask people questions, bringing out the best characters for my plays. I was good at it. And it was the first time I'd ever realized that I had that talent and I wanted to be a stage manager. So I came home from college and I said, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to be a stage manager." And he said, "Hey, pumpkin, how are you making any money doing that? That's not a real job. People don't do that." And he was in sales for IBM for a number of years. And I thought, well, how can I combine theater and sales? I'll go into television. So I went and I had an informational interview at WMAQ in Chicago with the sales director and the news director. And I said, if you had a daughter my age who wanted to get into the business, where would you tell them to go? And they said, target your market small, like to 100 and 140 television stations out of 215 markets. And so I did. And I got a job offer. My first one was in Duluth, Minnesota. And when you start off in a small market, you just want to keep moving up and you want to keep rising and getting into the top three, which are New York, LA, and Chicago. My goal was to get back to Chicago by the time I was 27. So I have arrived at that point, right? I will have made it getting to that really top market. So that's how I got into television in the first place.
Okay. And, a lot of people love that career in television because it's fast paced. You get to have a lot of different experiences, get to meet a lot of influential people. What were some of the things that you ended up loving about that career?
I did love that aspect of it. You're right. I was in sales. I filled in sometimes for news people or commercials. I would make a lot of those because I was already talent. And so the flexibility and the meeting people and the lunches and the events were, you're right, super exciting and enticing. It was, and some days you could live by the things to do, like the events, taking clients to these places or going out to these shows. There was always that energy, like you put it. It was always there. And that was exciting to have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also hear it can be pretty cutthroat in the industry. Is that something you experienced as well?
Absolutely. Yes, of course. I had a really hefty budget and I work best with freedom. So if you basically stay away from me, I will perform. If I am feeling smothered or too much like hovering over me, like, where's this, where's that? It's a deterrent for success for me. And so I had some managers that happened to say, Gail, you are great when you're on. If you could just be up here the whole time, that would be fantastic. Can you do that? And I can't do that. I sold and then I took a rest, and I sold and then I took a rest. And it was like that. I was 100% commission, pretty much actually 80 to 90% for probably 12 years. And I was in a position at a television station where I made, oh my gosh, John, it was a salary for a year, and it was the worst year of my life. It was the worst. Yeah, I did not like it.
So is that part of what started to give you this idea that you wanted to do something different?
It actually, isn't it true that when you are doing something you love and then you realize that it's not that way anymore, you really know what you love that much more, it makes it sweeter. So that situation taught me what I needed to be successful, if that makes sense. I realized when it was gone that I needed that freedom to be successful.
Yeah, and I was looking at your website, and you had a phrase that went along the lines of, people are so much more effective when they're basically doing their job in the way that is unique to them and allows them to be, to have the freedom to perform in the way that they're built to perform. Could you talk about that a little bit more? I know I'm paraphrasing, but what did you mean by that?
Everyone is born with a pattern of taking action. That's what I work with right now. It's called conation, the third part of the mind. And what I mean by that statement that I said is when people know how they take action, it's their ideal sweet spot. It's the nirvana of productivity, I would say. And when I knew that, because I can speak for myself very clearly. When I know that and I fight for it, I don't regret anything that happens when I go with my natural grain and go with my gut. When I ignore it or dismiss it for who I think is a bigger, better person, that's when I start to have potential regrets, is when I start to do things the way other people do them because I see them having success. And as I've gotten older and realize there's a filter that I so need to have to sift through the information of all of the other successful people say that I need to do. And if it's not through my lens, John, it's not going to work. That's what I mean by that phrase. You need to know how you work. For me, I need to know how I work, and I need to sift and filter through the information my way. And then I'm most successful. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I know a lot of people say, there's Simon Sinek and this and that, and 20,000 books out there that are about finding your purpose or your why or your passion or whatever it may be. What makes your approach different from those? Because that was something that I liked about your background, is you help people discover some of this at a much earlier age. And maybe, looking back, I wish I would have had more of that technique applied to me, because I found as an adolescent and then through high school, it was very difficult to understand what your strengths are. And I don't think it was unique to that time when we grew up. I think it's still happening today. So how is this approach you're taking a bit different?
Well, it wasn't around when we were in high school. That's for sure. It wasn't around. It is around now, but it wasn't around then. It actually was discovered in 1987 is when it came out. And John, I'm like, my head's like scrambling with everything because I was like thinking about different things. I want to get on the exact track. So can you ask me that question again? So I want to be succinct with my answer.
Yeah, I guess okay, I'll say it again. So there are a ton of different books, different podcasts that all go into how do you find your why. I even did my own podcast episode on this. And I think this whole concept in many ways gets overplayed. But my version that I came up with is, I think one of the things, regardless of your age, that you can do is look back at when you were younger, when you were an adolescent, when you were in high school, etc. And what were the things that you loved to do? It could have been playing sports, or it could have been being very creative, or it could have been you like to write. Because I think if you go back in time to what energized you when you were young, you probably still have that same passion, and it may have gotten buried somewhere. So I know the technique you use is working with maybe I know you work with different groups, but one of them is with children and adolescents. So I was wondering, how do you go about helping them understand what their gifts are and where they can operate to be most comfortable with, what brings them joy?
First of all, you're so right. I agree with you 150%. Your gifts and talents and passions are there when you're on the playground. You are so right about that. And I think that you're right. It gets crusted over by life, but they're there. I loved asking people questions. I loved being random. I love interviewing, actually. I do like asking people questions. I like asking people questions that matter. But on the playground, I got looked at like I was a crazy person. Like, what? She's switching gears again? And so that was the beginning of the crust of life that encompassed and covered up my gift, is because I started reacting to other people's reaction from me being me. And so making that more important than what I wanted to do. And that's where the crust starts to come over. And I don't work with the personality. I don't work with people's personalities. I work with how they solve problems. So for example, and there's crust over both. When you have your motivation and you have your passion, when you have your why, as you've said, and you find that, there's a pattern of how you continue to take action every day. That's the same. You're born with it and you're going to die with it. And that's what I work with.
Thank you for joining us today on the Passion Struck podcast. We'll be right back. This episode is sponsored by Athletic Greens, the health and wellness company that makes comprehensive daily nutrition so easy. As we talk about all the time on this show, there are so many stressors in life, from crazy careers, busy schedule, sleep issues, lack of exercise, and maybe most importantly, the lack of getting great nutritional support. And that ultimately impacts how we perform, both in our careers and in our daily life. I first learned about Athletic Greens a few years ago from Tim Ferriss, and I used to take so many vitamins each and every day. And Athletic Greens has simplified that because all I do now is do one scoop in the morning. And that gives my body all it needs to thrive. And it's such an easy way to create a great habit, because all you have to do is remember, as part of your morning routine, just get up, put one scoop into an 8-ounce glass of water. It tastes great, and it's as easy as that. And that one scoop contains 75 vitamins, ranging from multivitamins, multiminerals, immune supporting mushrooms, and probiotics. All those things that we need to fill nutritional gaps in our diet and replace the multiple pills like I was taking before. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is offering my audience a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 travel packs with your first purchase when you visit athleticgreens.com/passionstruck. Thank you again for listening and supporting the show. I really, really appreciate the fact that you share the show and that you listen to the show. And by the way, all those codes and links that I mentioned from the sponsors will be in the show notes. Now, let's get back to becoming Passion Struck.
Now, how that transfers to keep the crust off a kid, let's just go there. So the crust can start to form, in my opinion, John, when other people's way of working is descended on your way of working. Meaning they are telling you that that way isn't right, that you need to do things my way, a teacher, a parent, it doesn't matter, or a kid. And you start to listen to that. You're like, oh, okay, maybe they know it better. And then the crust starts to form. So what I do is very early on, I establish that child's pattern for taking action. And then I teach the parents to fight for the child to have that freedom to keep the learning alive, to keep the excitement in the eyes. Because about 3rd grade is when the lights can go out. If you are different from most teachers, if you're different from parents, like if the way you work is different, it could get very difficult. So at a very young age, I established how people work. And then I encourage them to keep that open, the lines of communication, the curiosity, the learning through how they work, if that kind of makes sense.
It does. And how does that then influence the career that they can get into? Is it because of what they're most comfortable doing kind of leads into certain pathways that they can take where they get to continue to express themselves in that way? Is that kind of the idea?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, exactly right. If you're born with a pattern of taking action and you can identify that in a 3-year-old, and if you know that 3-year-old is not into the details at all, but you are as a parent, I will tell you that reading time will be disastrous for you, because it was for me. I have a child that is not into the details, and reading time was horrible. And we were constantly fighting until I knew how he worked. And when I knew that, I'm like, oh my goodness, he doesn't have a need for the details. He needs the information in a different way. He pays attention to it, but he needs it in a different way. So when I knew this talent about him, I adjusted so he could get the information his way, and then it worked out. That's just one example. So you're right. If you are naturally not in the details, you're not going to be a patent attorney, or you're not going to be an attorney probably at all, or an accountant. You need to be into the details. If you're not, it's going to be tough, and you have to have other reasons for it. But based on your natural way of taking action, there are careers that naturally dovetail into your way of doing things. Yes.
Okay. So I know one of the biggest challenges today is the peer pressure that kids are facing. And I think when you get into this, they start operating in a different way. I think a lot of it is because whether it's social media, peer pressure, whatever, it could even be the zip code you grow up in, your parents, they're giving you all these beliefs that are influencing your persona and how you see yourself, which I think too many of us, especially when we're young, we take on these things because, especially if we're different from others, you want to fit in. So and I know today in this social media age that I think both our sets of kids are growing up in, I think it's made it even worse than perhaps when we were growing up, because everything seems to be constantly on. And not only, is it your friends who are influencing you, but other things that you're seeing on the web, other messages that are getting into your head. So as you're working with kids who are going through this, and there's a parent who might be listening to this, what are some techniques that you use to help those kids, stick to more of their self-narrative, or looking inside themselves instead of feeling like they have to be part of the mob or the community, whatever it might be?
All right. So I'm moving over into another lane, John. This isn't cognitive. The part of the mind that I work with doesn't have anything to do with social media. It doesn't have anything to do with social media. So I'm going to answer your question just parent to parent, right? Just parent to parent, because I have a son that is influenced by that, and I have a son who's not influenced by that. And different kinds of music that you may or may not agree with, or being on social media. Wouldn't it be great if what I said next was the answer to it all? I can speak to what has worked for me. And when they were little, when I noticed their response or their attitude after they were on something, listening to something, watching something, looking at YouTube or Instagram or whatever they're doing, I asked them to pay attention to how they're feeling. If they want to contribute and give back, do you feel filled up right now? Are you in a position of contributing? Because that's super important to me to raise contributors. Did this help you be a contributor? Does it help you be a respectful person? If the answer is no, then we need to rethink that, because my husband and I agreed on 3 things that we wanted out of our kids before we even had kids. One of them was to be a contributor to the world. And the second one was to have respect for yourself and others. And the third was to have integrity. If what happens on the ground, like matching socks, straight A's, social media, if it doesn't contribute to one of those 3 things that were or are important to us, then it needs to take a back seat. And honestly, that takes time for us. It's not like a one and done. It's not like a conversation. It takes time, John. That's not easy for me at all.
Right.
Yeah. How do you navigate that?
Well, I think like many parents, I have 2 children who are 6 years apart. Most people probably have them closer. But unfortunately, my wife had a number of miscarriages, and then had some other things that made it difficult for her to have children. But regardless of the age split, they both learn in very different ways. My son, who's older, was the type who many things came easy to him, whether it was learning music or sports or other things. He was just a natural athlete, just a natural musician. But for him, life really changed when he went to middle school, because we moved from Charlotte to Austin, and he went from, a relatively small school setting into Westlake school system in Austin, where, I think in his grade alone, he had 1,000 to 1,200 kids.
Wow.
And not only that, but, they're one of the top school systems in the country. So the level of education there was much higher, not to belittle what he experienced in, Lake Norman, but it was considerably different in the quality.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, he was having a ton of peer pressure, because at that time he was going into middle school, and he didn't necessarily know kids, and he started kind of getting into the wrong groups of kids, so to speak. And then when we moved here to the Tampa Bay area, we put him in a private school. And to be honest, his first few years, he really bombed. But we came to realize he was bombing because he had never really learned how to study, how to focus, how to organize himself. And so for him, going into that smaller private school long term was the best thing for him, because he kind of figured it out at the end of his sophomore year, and now has just excelled over time. Whereas my daughter is kind of the opposite. Not very much comes easy to her, but she's an extremely hard worker. So much to the point that we were wondering, why does it take her to much longer at times to grasp things, or why does she have to put in more work? And it turns out she had sensory and auditory processing issues that, luckily we caught when she was in elementary school. And so because she was treated for it, she's gotten, a lot better. I still think she still learns differently
Mm-hmm.
because of that, and has to work harder in some ways to do it. But I would agree with you. One of the things that we have tried to instill in them is the idea of humility, because
Mm-hmm.
I think I say this a lot on the show. It's part of my book. I think right now we are facing three major contagions, and I call them the contagion of the human mind, human spirit, and human ego. So it's
Mm-hmm.
apathy, comfort, and showmanship. And I think so many people are growing up indifferent to serving others, serving the world, etc. So, we wanted to teach them humility. We wanted to teach them, serving others. We wanted to teach them empathy and compassion and those things, because, and also not be self-critical of them, but let them be themselves, because I I think the more you can let a person early on make mistakes, maybe like my son did, I'd much rather have him learn that now than when he's 20, when he was 15 and 16, than when he was in college, or 23, 24. And so those are some of the ways that we've managed it. But to your point, I think each kid is very different. For me, I had always hoped, because I grew up in the family where we all played football and were into the big sports, and neither of the kids were necessarily like that. They were more artsy. So, but rather than force them into, what works for me, we kind of just let them focus on the interests that bring them joy.
What you said about your son, I recognized it so clearly. You said that he had a hard time for a couple of years when you moved to the private school in Tampa, but after that, he figured it out. he figured it out, right?
He figured it out. He learned through that school how to study, how to apply himself, that he was going to have to put in the work because, you know, their academics were really tough. In fact, when he went to college, he thought it was a heck of a lot easier than some of the stuff he did in high school. But when he came into it, because he didn't grow up like many of his classmates, growing up into a system like that, it was much more difficult for him to have to meet those academic standards without having the study habits and, you know, maybe focus and organization that many of his classmates had.
Do you think that you can have passion without pain?
No, I mean, I think if you've ever listened to any show that David Goggins has been on, Navy SEAL David Goggins, or I just did an episode with, you know, another Navy SEAL commander, Mark Devine. I don't think that, I don't care if it's passion or, you know, living a no regrets life or whatever it is, unless you're facing obstacles, challenges, fears, whatever they may be in your life, unless you face those, have failures, learn from them, you're never going to excel to the point that, in fact, if I meet someone and they tell me, you know, it's always been an easy ride, they've never had setbacks, things like that, you know, to me, I call BS, or something's going to happen in the future, because no one who is a strong leader or a strong human in life gets there without the pain of, you know, emotional struggle, as well as other things that they have to overcome.
Here's what you did, John. Here's the beauty of it. It's so exciting. Sorry, it's so exciting. It's so exciting to see. If you picture a balloon full of confetti, right? And there's so much in that, like the irritating stuff that your friend might send you in a card or find all over your table. If you have a balloon that's full of confetti and it's the kid and it's floating down to the bottom, and as soon as it hits the ground, the parents kind of reach out their hand to try and catch it and protect it from hitting the ground, which is the pain. But it's not until that child or student balloon experiences pain in the popping that you see what's inside. And so what you did, and I do completely agree with, we watch the mistakes and the pain happen under our roof. We watch that pain, we experience that pain with them. We're there alongside them, not to get them out of it, but then and only then can you see how they solve problems and what they're made of on the inside. And you did that, which is pretty rare to see.
Well, my daughter had a similar experience this past year herself. I don't know how some of these kids are doing it, because COVID and the restrictions has placed so much other pressure and in some ways isolation on them at a time when you know, they're in their formative years where community is so important to them. And in her case, you know, when you took away some of her outlets, which she used to play in rock bands, social clubs, and others that you're no longer able to do, you lose this whole complete outlet for your anxiety. And obviously she's not alone. I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of kids who were impacted. But in her case, you took the person who is a valedictorian, had a 4.7 average, and you know, part of it was her own doing, because she tried to take on 7 AP classes in her junior year.
Wow.
But
Wow.
You know, she struggled through it, ended up getting almost all straight A's, but it was not an easy path for her. There were periods where she got a ton of anxiety, not as much from the classes, but you know, I just think the pressure that she was putting on herself, because her mom and I weren't putting that pressure on. In fact, I was like, you're crazy to be to be trying to take this on. I wouldn't do it. If you bomb this, it's going to only impact your ability to get into some of these colleges that you want. But she was dead set on wanting to do it. So, I'm not, I think similar to my son, sometimes you've got to learn the lessons by going through these periods of time. And it's, it was a tough year for her, but, already this year, she's, hitting her senior year with a much different attitude. And, I think core strength that she's built up inside her, that, she can overcome adversity. And I think it's good to have adversity.
Way to go. Way to go, Dad. Yes, I would agree.
So can you talk a little bit about then how, I know you're certified in Kolbe. I have taken a Kolbe test myself. It's been a little bit, but I know that the whole Kolbe model is all about taking action. So for someone who doesn't understand it, or who might not have taken one of these tests, why is this something that you would want to give, either to your children, or why could it be, say you're a Gen Zer or a millennial out there and you've never taken this before, why would you want to take it? What's it going to tell you about yourself that you might not know?
It might tell you that you do things differently than your teachers, and it has nothing to do with your IQ or your personality. And when you know that it has nothing to do with your teacher. So my son really felt stupid because he was opposite of the teacher. So he came home and he felt dumb and less than. And now, knowing this about him, we can go into the classroom equipped. So that's one thing it does, is it equips you for how your student is talented, because they are talented. And we had a meeting, and the meeting was, how can you be successful being so different, taking action so differently than the teacher? And the three of us came up with a brainstorm. Tyler wanted to be the go-to guy. He wanted to be the fix-it guy for the school and the classroom. So because the teacher said yes, he started fixing things, and he got up and he would move around and he would fix lights and clocks and desks. And now he's in welding school. He wants to be a master carpenter and welder by the time he's 18. And he's in a construction technology track. If I didn't know how he worked, John, if I didn't know that, I would still be banging my head against a wall to tell him to plan. Don't be last minute. Pick up your room. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And shaming instead of celebrating and highlighting. That's huge. So we stopped fighting about the things that weren't going to change in him, because they're not. There's no way I could overrule or overturn his innate pattern for taking action. So as a parent, I learned to go with it. And when I learn to go with it, he learns to go with it and grows his confidence, and then slowly knows how to respectfully request what he needs to be the best student every single day that he can. That's one advantage of knowing how you work when you're young.
No, that's terrific advice. And I think, unfortunately, for many kids, and I'd probably put myself there, I in some ways had so much micromanagement happening in my home that, I think you launch out into the world. If you would have looked at me when I was in high school, you would have thought, I was a perfect person. I was doing, top 5 in my class, varsity athlete.
Wow.
All the leadership things you would want. I would volunteer, look great on paper. But, in my case, I don't think my siblings and I had that opportunity to really face adversity and get to know our own inner narrative. And for me, then I came out of that, went in the military, where they're creating a inner narrative for you, so to speak, because the military is going to ingrain you into their traditions and how they want you to function and operate. So for me, I think it took well after I left the military to I started really practicing more mindfulness and self-introspective. And it's something that I wish kids could do earlier on, because, the longer you take to do it, the more work it takes to get rid of all the baggage that you've built up. So when I want to go back to the Kolbe analysis just for a second. If I remember the test correctly, it has buckets such as fact finder, follow through, quick start, implementer.
Wow, that's impressive.
And
Yes.
I'm wondering, what does it mean? Because I hear something like quick start. Like what does that mean as far as this model goes?
Do you remember when you took it?
Probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay. So the modes, do you want me to explain what they mean?
Sure.
So the fact finder mode is your need for information. So it's 1 through 10 in each of the modes. And the only difference, John, is time. So if someone gets a 1 or someone gets a 10, that just means they spend a lot more time in that mode if they have a 10. So It doesn't have anything to do with good or bad or right or wrong. It just kind of is so each of the sections have 10, 1 through 10. And so fact finder, if you're a 1, you need bullet points. If you're a 10, you need a lot of details, and you dive into what's been done in the past. The second mode, like you said, is follow through. That's systems and organization. So if you're in the 1, 2, 3 category, you will shortcut, skip steps, circumvent, cut through red tape and bureaucracy. Have piles all over your office or your house, and you know where everything is, but you have to have things out in front of you to see it, to know it's there. On the other end of the follow through, the second line of the organization, the 7 through 10 is your need to finish what you start. Do not interrupt these people. They don't work. You need to let them finish what they start, and then they can move on to the next. They're planners. They are systematizers. They create long-term, long-range plans for businesses, and they're very good at it. They work with timelines and calendars. And the green is risk and uncertainty. And up at the top of the green, the 1, 2, 3 category is where you want to keep things stable. You don't need a lot of surprises. So you will work to keep things status quo, right? Why change something? It works this way. Let's keep it this way. On the other end of the spectrum, 7 through 10 in green, they're going to change things because they're bored. They're just going to change it for the sake of change. They're very last minute. They do things randomly. They show up in the middle of your door and start asking questions. They're very random, and they need a lot of options. So they're innovators. And then the last is implementer. This is always the confusing one for people. Implementer is your need to get your hands on the environment, like physically need to get your hands on the environment. So if your daughter is in a band, or if she has her hair colored, or if she has tattoos or piercings, I'm not sure. But in the 1, 2, 3 category of the yellow, you can envision how something's going to look. On the bottom, you need to physically get your hands on it and make sure it's a viable quality product. So at the bottom of implementer 7 through 10, these jobs would be pilot, race car driver, surgeon, craftsman, jobs that require you to physically get your hands on things. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Yeah. So that person is very quality driven. If they have implementer in them, they're touch oriented. Physical things matter to them. And my kids and my family are all over the place. And we assess jobs and responsibilities based on their modus operandi or their MO.
Well, I think the last thing I would want is to have a surgeon who is not detail oriented.
Yes. Right. Absolutely. Yes.
So how many school systems across the country are now giving something like the Kolbe to help kids analyze? And when do you think, if you were going to recommend it, is the best time that a a person as they're growing up would first start taking this test?
I would love to see it in young kids. I work with families privately, but as far as school systems, 8th grade to sophomore year is ideal. And honestly, it's been all over the world, John. It is all over the world. Myself and there were originally 15 in our group who could handle and work with kids. So I'm specially trained to work with kids in this capacity. And high schools and Montessori schools, it's all over the world that it's been in schools. It's not inundated because it just opened up like 3 years ago. So we are still working. And then undeclareds in college. Colleges really appreciate this function to work with the undeclared students, because with the Kolbe comes a job opportunity. It's through OpGig. So OpGig finds a career based on how you take action. So when colleges can have 200 undeclareds and now I come in or someone will come in and work with them, then they know exactly the lane of all of those kids that didn't know where they were going to go. And that's super helpful.
It is. Well, I'll just go back to my kids for a second, and just the way that they approach music, because it was completely opposite. Both kids started playing piano probably when they were 3 or 4, and both are very good at it. And they're both able to play other instruments. Now, my son is the type, he is a phenomenal drummer and percussionist overall. But I could have, let's just pick a song. He could never have heard a song from the Foo Fighters, and he could hear one for the first time, and after hearing it 1 or 2 times, he can play the whole song. Whereas my daughter is more. My daughter plays piano. She can play other instruments. She ended up picking up the bass, and her reasoning was actually awesome. She wanted to play in a band. And she's like, Dad, just think about it. If most bands are mostly boys, and what are they going to want to do? They're going to want to be the lead singer, the drummer, or the lead guitarist. So she goes, if I become a really good bassist, everyone's going to want to have me in the band. But her way of learning it is she goes onto YouTube and she can read music very well. And so she'll just read, the chords for different songs. And, she was able to pick it up very quickly because of the way she learns. So it, just that small experience. And I'm giving this for the audience out there, are 2 different learning styles, but, it gives you an indication of how each child, learns and applies themselves, which I think it's important to have kids or young adults, wherever they may be, realize how they learn, and because learning and then how you perform in your job are, I think there's such a parallel to them.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, there is.
So what is some advice that you can give the listeners then about, as you've been applying Kolbe now to different groups of kids, working with families, what are the common things that you see? If there is like a 1, 2, 3 list of things that you help people work with, what are those? And can you give some of the experiences that you've had?
I would say take advice from you, John. Don't be afraid to let them make mistakes under your roof. Don't be afraid to don't let them make mistakes under your roof, so you can help them. Have them know how they work, so you know what you're working with. And they are totally and completely capable, more capable than you think. Just because they're young doesn't mean they don't know how to solve problems. They might need to learn how to do things. So for example, I have your child make a bed. Hey, can you go make your bed? And the child goes back and they put hospital corners on their bed, and everything is really taut and you can bounce a quarter off it. Like my dad used to like, he was in the military. And so then my son comes and makes his bed and he just flips one cover up on the whole thing. See, I made my bed. So you step back as a parent and you ask yourself, what's the point? Is the point that my son makes his bed, or is the point that my son makes his bed his way? What's the point? And you'll save yourself a ton of headache if you realize that the point is that he does the thing, not does the thing your way.
Okay. And I know one of the biggest issues for parents is the whole idea of punishment, or, what do you do if kids are acting out or not doing what they're doing things in a different direction than you think might be healthy for them. So what's your thought on how do you punish kids? Because when I was growing up, I would just get grounded or get the belt or, things like that. But I know there's a lot of different thinking on this approach on what provides the best benefit.
Again, John, you and I went through the same thing. I went through the same thing. I had to write things out 100 times. I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, what's the point? I don't understand. So I am a firm believer of natural consequences. And I give age appropriate decisions and allowances to kids. So you can have the red one or the blue one, right? Depending on how old you are. But I guess I would need like a specific example. My kids know that if they find themselves in jail, that they got themselves there and they're going to get themselves out. Like, that's kind of the way it works. But if they're heading down, like, have they been ding dong ditching? Yes. My son went ding dong ditching. Did we find out about it? And did he have to go apologize? Absolutely. But natural consequences are, I find, the most effective for sure. I don't know how else to say it, but that's how I've generally done it.
Well, let's take an example that you find out, you've got a high school student, you find out that they're skipping classes and not attending school as frequently as they're telling you that they are.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do in a situation like that, or what would you recommend?
So, and it's so interesting. What's your threshold is what I would ask the parent. And I ask the child this too. Are you okay to repeat freshman year? Are you okay to not graduate? How are you going to make money if you are you okay with retaking sophomore year or retaking this class in the summer? Depending on that answer. So if they're skipping classes, what else is going on behind the scenes? There's always something underneath, right? Temper tantrums and tirades are usually an outward expression of what's going on behind the scenes. That's the same with, I think, really bad behavior. When I've seen my kids have super bad behavior, there's usually something going on underneath. So I try and address that because that's just the external thing that's a result of what's going on, at least in our house it's been. So I try and find out what's going on. And then if they're skipping class, then they may have to repeat that class. The tricky part comes in, John, is if they don't care.
Right.
If they don't care, that's a bigger issue. That's such a bigger issue. If they don't care, I mean, then stop all expectations, stop everything. Like, let's figure out why. What do you care about? Like, let's get down to it. Cut the swath out, cut the crust away. What's going on? Do we need to have some more fun? Like, what is happening? And find out, because that's worth the fight. That is worth it.
Okay. And I kind of want to end on this last question. I know you're big on asking questions, and that questions can lead to different things. So, so what types of questions do you recommend asking to help people uncover their superpower?
You mean of their kids or themselves?
Let's tackle both. Let's start maybe with the kids.
Okay. My son was just bouncing on the trampoline a couple months ago, and he was bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. And he said, I'm so glad I stuck with hockey past the 5-month mark. I was like, why do you say 5 months? And he said, because in wrestling, when I was in wrestling, I quit at 5 months. And when I was in karate, I knew I wanted to quit at 5 months, but I stuck it out. And in basketball, the same thing happened. So I knew it was coming in hockey. And this is what he said, I just persevered through the 5 months. So if he didn't have the freedom to choose and decide, how would he have known that he has this 5-month obstacle? He wouldn't have known. So based on the freedom, then he knows. And asking him how he knew that and how he discovered that. And something just happened the other day. Oh, as far as picking things up or around the house, it's summertime. So there wasn't school and he was feeling a little lazy. So when he was cooking things, it was just for him, or he was picking up just his thing. And so I say things like, I've noticed that when you're cooking or when you're cleaning, it is just for you. And in my mind, John, I'm saying, pick it up. We work together as a family. What are you doing? Like, you're being, I kind of was like that, but I thought, how can I phrase this in such a way? And so I say, I've noticed. And he's like, yeah, Mom, I'm super lazy. I'm just not feeling like doing anything. I'm really lazy this summer. And I thought about it and I said, tell me about the season when you kick it in. When is the season where you're not feeling lazy? What does that look like? And he kind of thought about it. He's like, well, there isn't a season for that. I said, I know that when we work as a family on all cylinders, we're rock stars and everyone benefits when we're on all cylinders. And so we appreciate your input and we need your input. And so the next day he stepped it up without the shame and he came forth and started doing more chores. Right. And so questioning instead of shaming to get out of it for us has helped. Yeah, I could write a book on questions. I could write a book on what to ask. The alarm didn't go off. My husband so wanted to get my son out of bed. And I was like, no. And so it was this battle, right? Because I've had parents say, you want to let my kid fail, Gail? You want to let my kid fail? Freedom breeds passion. So if they have the freedom to choose and then deal with the consequences, you're going to find passion like you did in your kids, John, earlier on. So the alarm didn't go off. My husband did wind up waking him up, and that was the last time he's going to wake him up for high school. So he'll deal with the consequences, and he's been getting up ever since.
Okay. Well, Gail, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing so much of your wisdom for the audience. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, John. I've loved it.
And I was so pleased with how this episode today went with Gail Swift, because it took a completely different direction than I thought it would when we set out on it. And I'm so glad that we were able to spend so much time on advice that parents can use with their kids, both through her personal examples and mine. And if you haven't checked out the Kolbe Index, I will put some links to it in the show notes. I've used it myself, and it is a great tool I have found in understanding how you function and, more importantly, how you take action, a skill that we need whether we're an adolescent or an adult. And I did want to highlight some episodes that I think if you like today's, you'll like these as well. One is with Dara Kurtz, where we talk about how do you create a crazy perfect life. And similar to Gail, Dara also was living what many would think was a great life, being a financial advisor. But then she was diagnosed with breast cancer and her whole life changed. And now she has dedicated her life to speaking, is the author of 3 books, and so much more. Great episode for you to check out. Another one is with Saskia Lightstar, who was living the party girl life, running a software company in South Africa, where she too was diagnosed with cancer, and then used that experience to write her book, The Cancer Misfit, about what happens not when you're going through cancer, but after you've gone through it, and how you get through that stage. How her life has changed so much because of her focus on self-love, and how you too can learn self-love by asking yourself the right questions. And as I said at the beginning of the show, if there is a guest or topic that you would like to hear, please reach out on Instagram at either Passion Struck Podcast or John R. Miles. And thank you so much for continuing to give us such great ratings. A number of weeks ago, we broke through 1,000 5-star ratings, and I can't tell you how important it is to our show that we get ratings like that in the comments below. We read each one, and they are so important to our future and our goal of making passion go viral for so many out there. Thank you as always, and I appreciate your support so much. Thank you so much for joining us. The purpose of our show is to make passion go viral. And we do that by sharing with you the knowledge and skills that you need to unlock your hidden potential. If you want to hear more, please subscribe to the Passion Struck Podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts at. And if you absolutely love this episode, we'd appreciate a 5-star rating on iTunes and you sharing it with 3 of your most growth-minded friends so they can post it as well to their social accounts and help us grow our Passion Struck community. If you'd like to learn more about the show and our mission, you can go to passionstruck.com where you can sign up for our newsletter, look at our tools, and also download the show notes for today's episode. Additionally, you can listen to us every Tuesday and Friday for even more inspiring content. And remember, make a choice, work hard, and step into your sharp edges. Thank you again for joining us.